Cool. Welcome to the next APAC community call. Today's topic theme is going to be network research, and we have a presenter, Dr. Feng from China, who will be presenting with his research that he did previously. But before we go there, I do want to bring you guys some news from Odyssey, and I think we do have Chan here, right? Yes, Dr. Yu. So we want to put some news out there. Number one, Dr. Yu, we want to congratulate on the collaboration spotlight that you received recently. Chan, you majored at Severance Hospital, and then you went on to get your PhD at Jeju University, but now I heard that you're now back at Severance Hospital as a research professor there. So congrats and great contribution. I mean, I won't go on about all the wonderful stuff that Chan does. We call him a robot because we don't know where he gets enough time in a day to do all the stuff he does. I mean, the one thing when I first met Chan, it's like, oh my goodness, Chan, can you go at 100 miles an hour? Slow down. And then he keeps piling. And he's been very, very instrumental, especially during COVID-19, getting HERA to open up their medical claim system to work with us in the Odyssey community with COVID. So again, wonderful accomplishments. And thank you for being such an active member of the Odyssey community.
I thank you. I owe it a lot to Odyssey.
No. We owe you, okay? Don't say you owe us. We owe you a lot. Other news that I want to bring up from the last two community calls. The first one is actually from this past yesterday, actually, on the FDA. So they did talk a bit about the progress of where they were with FDA. And I don't know, Patrick, if you want to fill in a little bit more once I'm done with this part. But we do want to give some shout outs and updates. There's been a paper that has also been accepted into the rheumatology journal. So feel free, click on it, read it, enjoy it. And then you can see here another one that's been published into the dermatology journal as well. So Patrick, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about the CBER Best Initiative seminar series that's going on.
Yeah, I can just mention briefly, one of the substantial Odyssey collaboratives is to support our colleagues at the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. And there's a contract that's with Columbia University, Northeastern University, and UCLA, where we're supporting doing methodologic research and also convening meetings to try to bring together folks that are interested in talking about methodologic and clinical challenges that are of relevance for FDA's Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research. And the FDA CBER group is where regulation of vaccines go. So as you can imagine, all of the time and energy right now is focused on what can we be doing to make sure that we're appropriately monitoring the safety of the COVID-19 vaccines. So in the Odyssey community call this last week, George Ripsack, David Madigan, Mark Suchard discussed the work that Odyssey is doing to support the FDA, and also highlighted that work, while it's in collaboration with the FDA, is something we've been sharing globally. And actually, the Odyssey work that has been done directly supported our colleagues in the European Medicines Agency in their current evaluation of the AstraZeneca vaccine in the latest issue that you may have heard about associated with blood clots and coagulopathy issues. So we're trying to help these problems that are kind of worldwide. Today was actually the first of these FDA-sponsored BEST seminar series, where we had Dr. Dan Salmon come and present kind of a historical perspective about safety surveillance and what went well and what didn't go so well for the H1N1 pandemic about over a decade ago now. And I thought it was a really great presentation. The recording will be posted. And it would be something, if you're looking for a historical context of how real-world evidence was used, could have been used better, and what it took to have some successes, I think it was a very valuable presentation. And more generally, if you are interested in issues centered on vaccine safety surveillance and methodologic and clinical questions in that space, would encourage you to pay attention to the ongoing seminar series that Odyssey is sponsoring for the FDA. I would also encourage you to engage in the open Odyssey collaborative activities that are in this space, which includes a methods evaluation of methods for doing vaccines safety surveillance, a comparative effectiveness vaccines method study, as well as an ongoing study we have right now to characterize the background rates of adverse events of special interest for COVID-19. These are all current ongoing Odyssey collaboration opportunities that we'd welcome and encourage you all to get engaged in. And while some of it has been motivated or stimulated by our collaboration with the US FDA, I think what's become extremely apparent is that most of the questions we're dealing with right now are of global nature, and we really need to be considering these as global collaboratives and having implications of the research to be shared around the world.
Thank you for that. So again, as Patrick said, look out for the video if you guys are interested in listening, because it did happen already today. And then if you're interested at like 1 p.m. your time, 1 a.m. your time, or 2 a.m. your time on Wednesday, March 31st your time, there is a 2-hour planning session that the CDM working group is holding to talk about what the potential list of enhancements will be for version 5.4. We have moved away from version 6 and have gone back down to 5.4. So they are planning a special session to talk about some of the changes and what we want to propose as the new 5.4. And then something we're going to talk about a little bit later on today is this Odyssey March Visualization Challenge. Patrick, I think we're going to try to see if we can do something in this community call, right? When we're done with the presentation. The other things that I do want to bring up a little bit about is again, this is 2 different ones, right? If you're interested in hearing about some of the working group product updates, like the NLP, as well as some of the other working groups, you can watch the one from the previous one, where Jenna talked about advancing in the patient level predictions, as well as Hua talking about the NLP stuff. And last week, they did finish the prostate cancer study-a-thon. I believe a lot of the results are now available on the Odyssey data.org website, so you can go there and look at some of the results from the study-a-thon. Another thing I do want to bring up before we go to the presentation is we now have an Odyssey APAC community call page. Okay, so all these community calls, thank you to Craig for helping us, as well as the Odyssey APAC coordinating team. But we've put this up. Most of the calls from the previous sessions are now here. It looks very identical to the Odyssey community call, but this is specifically for APAC. You can see here we've gotten all the way up to right here. He's already even put a placeholder for the call that we're having literally right now, right? But all the previous calls are also out there, so feel free, if you've missed any of them, go out there and check them out. We will continue to keep these updated. We will probably update them about 1 week after the call due to other priorities that everybody has that's in the coordinating group. But please tell your folks, go check it out, check out what we've been doing. And with that, I am actually going to turn it over to Dr. Feng. Are you here? Dr. Feng? I see you. So Dr. Feng is from the Beijing Anding Hospital, as well as the other presenter who will be helping out is Dr. Xingwei Zhang, who's from SMIU Medical Center Science and Technology. So Dr. Feng, can you take the sharing right? You're on mute. There's a lot of feedback.
Hello?
Hello.
Hello?
There we
Can
go. Yep, we can hear you.
Oh, thank you.
Do you want to share your presentation, or do you want me to share your presentation?
Yes, I will introduce our team's network.
Okay.
有没有 PPT 需要分享一下 ？PPT 给你看一下，或者我也能展示一下。展示一下。
We can see your screen. Oh, there you go. Yes, if you put it in presentation mode. Perfect.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
我应该想定一下。
Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'm very glad to attend this meeting and you introduce the work of our team. My name is Feng from National Clinical Research Center for Mental Disorders, Beijing Anding Hospital, Capital Medical University. The topic of my report is treatment patterns and risk of switch to mania in bipolar depressive patients treated with antidepressants. A real-world study using the Odyssey Network. This work has also received strong support from colleagues from Akvia and Shoyu Company. I will introduce it in following 4 aspects.
Can you? Sorry, you're still on the same screen. It hasn't gone forward to the next one. 你的屏幕没有往下。我现在还看到那个 title page。对，行。
Okay. So I want to introduce what is a bipolar disorder. A bipolar disorder, just like a major depressive disorder, is one of a more common mood disorder. It is a current and chronic affective disorder, marked by alternating period of abnormal mood elevation and depression associated with impairment in function. The core symptom of mania involves talking excessively, breathing short, hostility, bad sleep, sometimes delusion, and symptom of depression phase of bipolar disorder, including persistent feeling of sadness, irritability or anger, loss of interest in previous enjoyed activity, excessive or inappropriate guilt, hopelessness, sleeping too much or not enough, changing in appetite and or weight, fatigue, problem concentrating, withdrawal, several losing or feeling of worthlessness and thoughts of death or suicide. Throughout the course of the disease, depression episodes accounted for 72% of the duration of the illness, and it also takes a longer time to remission. A lifetime prevalence of about 1 to 3% in the general population. In 2017, the global burden of disease study estimated there was 4.5 million new cases and a total of 45.5 million cases globally. The risk of suicide is high. Over a period of 20 years, 6% of those with bipolar disorder died by suicide, while 30 to 40% engaged in self-harm. Treatment and the treatment for the bipolar disorder is facing challenge. Medication may differ depending on what episode is being treated. The medication with the best overall evidence is mood stabilizer, which is an effective treatment for acute manic episodes, providing relapse. Antipsychotics to control psychotic symptoms. Some analyses indicate antipsychotics and mood stabilizer used together are quicker and more effective at treating mania than as a class of drugs used alone. Compared with manic episode, there are few effective treatments available for depressive episode. And now there are 4 drugs can use for bipolar disorder, bipolar depressive episode, approved by FDA. Both mood stabilizer and typical antipsychotics lack efficacy for depressive episode. The use of antidepressants in bipolar depressive episode treatment remains controversial due to the potential risk of induced a switch from depression to hypomania or mania. The use of antidepressants is controversy. There are 2 main questions. The first is that it controls the symptom of depression. The second is if it uses antidepressant, if it can trigger a manic episode. So should we use antidepressant for bipolar depression or not? There are big differences between the guideline and the experience from our clinical practice. The International Society for Bipolar Disorder Task Force reports an expert consensus. This statement discusses the use of antidepressant monotherapy for treatment of acute bipolar depression. But in the practice, antidepressant is the most commonly used treatment for bipolar depression, including antidepressant monotherapy and combination therapy with mood stabilizer and antipsychotics. Aiming at this problem, many studies have been carried out, including random control trials, systematic reviews, and meta-analysis, such like this 2016 systematic review and meta-analysis for the safety and efficacy of antidepressant therapy for the acute bipolar depression. But the conclusions are inconsistent. So we sought to real-world study using the Odyssey Network provide consistent results whether antidepressant could be used. Our study's objectives. The first is to investigate the treatment patterns of bipolar depression and the risk of manic switch with antidepressants. The second, to study whether the concurrent treatment with mood stabilizer and typical antipsychotics may reduce the risk of manic switch. For the measure, the cohort definition is the most important steps. The cohort were included considering the difference in clinical diagnosis across different regions, and antidepressant medication were used as alternatives for bipolar disorder, concurrent episode depression. For study population, the cohort entry event is a patient with diagnosis of bipolar disorder, current episode depression, or the patient had current antidepressant prescription and bipolar disorder diagnosis in the past. The inclusion-exclusion criteria. The patient who had concurrent diagnosis or history of schizophrenia, psychotic disorder, dementia, neurodegenerative disease, or psychiatric disorder due to substances were excluded. All the diagnoses were identified by ICD-10 codes, and antidepressant prescription was identified by X-norm codes. Cohorts were defined using Odyssey Atlas tools, just like the figure shows the process by defining cohorts. In our study, drug exposure, including three kinds of drugs, the use of antidepressant, mood stabilizer, or typical antipsychotics were included as a concurrent treatment. Bipolar disorder patients were further stratified into antidepressant or non-antidepressant groups. In the antidepressant cohort, bipolar disorder patients that are prescribed to antidepressant. In non-antidepressant cohorts, the bipolar depressant patients that are prescribed to antipsychotics or mood stabilizer and no antidepressant. For the AD groups were further stratified as AD concurrent with antipsychotics or mood stabilizer groups, or AD monotherapy groups, just like the flow diagram with over the patient selection. For the outcome, the first hypomania or mania diagnosis after prescription of antidepressant is counted as the outcome. After the antidepressant 0 to 3 months, we thought as acute phase. The 3 to 9 months after antidepressant, we thought as maintenance phase. The index date was defined as the earliest date of either a diagnosis of current depression episode or prescription of antidepressant. The patient had to have at least 6 months of continuous observation time before the index date as an indicator that patient maintained in the cohort. We follow up patients up to 24 months after to ensure sufficient length of time at risk for outcome. This figure is the procedure of the observation. This is our data source. We have 5 databases 2 from America, 1 from Germany, 1 from France, and 1 from our hospital, the Pending Hospital. This is a description of the data source. It include open claims, CDMs, just like
So we can go to next page. It's okay.
so okay.
It's all, yes.
These are the results. The total of over 2 million patients across 4 countries were included in analysis. The table is the descriptive characteristics of patients with bipolar depression. The largest number is open claim, and the smallest number is difference. In terms of age and gender, the results of this database are similar. The age are about 40 to 50 years old, and the male accounted for more than one third of them. And the younger population of bipolar diagnosis in China This is the treatment pattern. For the initial treatment, in inner circle, more than 70% of patients were prescribed antidepressants. From 19.6% of patients in the Beijing Andy to 46.9% of the patients in the Dear Germany were treated antidepressant normal therapy. And the Beijing Andy Hospital, we have more complicated treatment pattern.
Mm-hmm.
This is the incidence rate of many switch in our result. In AD and normal AD group, we found AD groups. The incidence rate of many switch in AD groups is lower than non-AD groups significantly. In 0 to 3 months and 3 to 9 months in open claims and hospital CDM. The incidence rate of manic switch in AD normal and AD combination groups. The result is similar. So in the study, the majority of the bipolar depressive patients received antidepressants for initial treatment, despite that antidepressants were not recommended as a first-line treatment for those conditions. As recommended by ICD guideline, antidepressants should not be used for long-term. However, in the study, the duration of antidepressant treatment was more than 1 year in most cases. So we thought antidepressant had been widely used in clinical practice to treat bipolar depression, even as initial treatment. Comparing to non-antidepressant treatment, antidepressants show no association with a higher risk of switch to mania in acute or maintenance phase. There are also no increased risk of manic switch observed in antidepressant monotherapy comparing to the concurrent treatment groups. A plausible explanation for the result is that there might be difference in the in the severity of the disease between antidepressant group and non-antidepressant group. As mood change and elevation in cycle frequency occur unpredictably in the nature course of bipolar disorder, patients with a mania predominant polarity, history of treatment emergent mania or hypomania, concurrent or predominant mixed feature, or recent rapid cycling are more likely to be prescribed for mood stabilizer or antipsychotics by psychiatrists in practice. Therefore, the observed higher rate of switch to mania in a concurrent treatment group could be the fluctuant nature of mood in bipolar disorder. Besides, many mood stabilizers and second-generation antipsychotics may have side effects hard to tolerate, which may jeopardize the medication compliance and expected response. The treatment options are made based on the proper assessment of the patient's condition. Antidepressants could be used as a safe and effective alternative treatment for bipolar depression and be recommended as first-line treatment. The large sample size and data from 5 administrative claim and EMR database with long follow-up of over 2 years better represented real-world practice. The almost CDM unified data from heterogeneous data sources with respect to normalize and the overall structure, allowing us to incorporate data from multiple healthcare systems around the world into our analysis. But our study has the limitation. First, propensity score was limited to control potential bias, and the sample size and the representativeness may vary across different databases. And I thought for mental disorder, these databases are lack of efficacy evaluation indicator, such as efficacy evaluation skills. So the use of this database will be limited. Therefore, it is very important to choose the research problem suitable for database. At the same time, we hope that through such research, we can also improve the quality of our clinical EMR data. Thanks for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Feng Lei. Anybody got questions for Dr. Feng Lei?
Yep, sure. I
Ken?
have. Hi.
Professor Yu, I'm sorry, I got to remember to call you Professor Yu.
很高兴，很Feng Lei. Actually, I have several concerns regarding with this study. Could you show the Atlas court page once again? The Atlas, the court definition of Atlas. Could you show the slide for the Atlas?
Yeah.
Please, yeah. Yep. Yes, this might be. So could you enlarge this screen, this slide? It is a little bit small, too small to see for others.
Let me see if I can get to it. Oh, never mind, he got it. Okay.
There it is. So Patrick or Noe and Nicole, please fix me if I was wrong. To my knowledge, the entry event of ADLAS combines the criteria by or condition. So you actually, I think, according to this court definition, it identifies a patient with the schedule no, bipolar disorder or that depressive mood, depressive episode of the bipolar, or those who actually exposed to antidepressant. So I believe you want to include identify the patients with all of this condition, aren't you? So so if you want to, so I'm a little bit concerned, but I have a little concern regarding with this definition. So that's the my question and comment. And the other one is that could you show the design of your study? Like you have the flow diagram. Oh yeah, that's it. Again, others, please fix me, correct me if I'm wrong. I have a little concern regarding with this study design because your independent variable here is the exposure to the antidepressant during the depressive episode of the bipolar disorder. And I think this study design may be susceptible to the immortal time bias, because if patients are exposed to the antidepressant, they have to survive longer than the comparator. So, target comparator should be exposed to the antidepressant after the index date, because the index date is the start of the depressive episode of the bipolar disorder. So they may survive longer. The target cohort should stay longer to get exposed to antidepressant, and the other part, in the comparator group, they don't need to stay longer here because they don't need to expose to other medications. So this design may be a little susceptible to the immortal time bias. That's my second and the final question and comment. So Nicole or Patrick, do you have any ideas?
So I'll comment on your second point there, Chan. And I don't know how bipolar is managed in other parts of the world, so I'm going to give a U.S.-centric perspective about this, which may not apply. But in the United States, one of the things that we see is that bipolar management, while there's guidelines that suggest how it should be done, there's two things that we see that are sometimes suboptimal, but unfortunately fairly prevalent. One is that patients with bipolar are only managed with antidepressants, and that can be problematic because there is a good amount of misdiagnosis of bipolar as just depression. And then patients who are misdiagnosed with depression and given an antidepressant have negative effects, and then only later are actually properly diagnosed with bipolar. When a patient is properly diagnosed with bipolar, the question of whether or not their antipsychotic or mood stabilizer is augmented with an antidepressant is usually one of the treatment choices that's been considered. So at least in the U.S., I think that the cohort number 1 versus cohort number 2 that is outlined here, that's fairly consistent with what we see in the U.S. for people diagnosed with bipolar. There is some fraction of them that actually do get an antidepressant and some fraction that don't. And so that can be an appropriate comparison. It is not exclusively the case that the antidepressant is treating a depressive episode. so much as the antidepressant is one of the treatments being used for the overall bipolar state of the individual. So I think that there is concerns about whether or not a clinician is just trying to manage the depressive state, or whether or not they've misclassified the indication itself when you see only antidepressant use. But I think that as it relates to the management of bipolar in the United States, we do see a healthy proportion of patients with a bipolar diagnosis who are then subsequently managed with the options that you see outlined on this slide. And just to your first point, just to confirm, you are correct in terms of how Atlas works, that those would be OR criteria. I have seen many cases where when trying to phenotype bipolar, one would do something similar to say either bipolar or bipolar preceded by a depression or antipsychotic treatments with some mental health diagnosis. So that is something that I have observed in the literature when trying to phenotype bipolar. So it's a valid question to raise, is did we mean for it to be an and rather than an or? But it could make sense to be an or if you're trying to be inclusive of the people who would be classified as bipolar, or we'd phenotype to attempt to find the people with bipolar.
Yes, so this is Xiaoling from Akivia. So can you, so Dr. Feng, can you go to the previous slides? So yeah, so just to follow up on what Patrick says, so we are actually including like all the three types of the patients. So we are including the patients who are diagnosed with the bipolar disorder, current episode depression. So that's one phenotype of the patients that we want to include in the study. And so in some of the clinical diagnosis, or in like the clinical diagnosis in China, so some of so they are now diagnosed with the bipolar current episode depression. So we are also including the patients who has the antidepressant or the depressive episode, but they have a bipolar disorder before the depressive episode. So we are including all these three types of the patients. So that would be a OR relationship. To answer your question, if that clarifies the question.
Yeah, if so, it's correct. Yeah, thanks for correcting this.
And
Hey, Pat,
Chan,
go ahead.
oh, sorry, Chan, just to your point about the immortal time bias, I think is quite an issue in the study design, and it's a little bit hard to see the exact design that was used just from the slides, but it seems to me there may be an issue with that. And you know, the idea of petitioning up the time, I think in the next couple, can you just go forward to the slides where you have the results?
To the next slide. Yeah.
So if you go, yeah, former one.
Back again. The flow chart.
One more.
The
flow chart. Flow chart.
Timeline.
Oh, sure. 上面 yeah, 对，上面
That's right.
对
Yeah, so it does seem to me, so without knowing the exact study design, it does seem to me that the definition of drug exposure does happen after the indexed event. So that would be a classic immortal time issue. And I wondered how you actually decided on the petitioning of the time in the follow-up. I think you had the first 3 months and then greater in the last results slide. You just flick forward now to the results, the last slide.
Nicole, one thing I just noticed on that exposure, why I wasn't as bothered by it though, is the index is claiming that it's the diagnosis, but the classification is within the 7 days of the diagnosis is when the drug is is classified. So basically looking for concurrent use of drug at the time of diagnosis.
I see. I get it. Okay.
So yeah, you got some issue with that wiggle room, but that's like within the boundary of the noise of the data, I would imagine.
Okay. Right. That makes sense. I'm sorry. So if you just go forward to that end slide, the table with the results. Sorry to keep flicking through all these tables. Keep going. One more. Yep. This one. Yeah, so you've got the period of 0 to 3 months and 3 to 9 months. And it's interesting there that the rate ratio to me looks quite low in that first, 3 months, but, and that may again just be identifying a problem with immortal time, perhaps because you wouldn't expect it to be quite so protective. So yeah, it just might need a bit more clarity on the study design and which actual, index date is being used and what that means in this study.
Yep, theoretically, the incidence of the outcome should be increased or equivalent in the AD group compared with non-AD group, but the result is the reverse of our, our theory and what we are now.
Quite a long way first. Yeah.
So it may be worthwhile to investigate what kind of the bias can be exist in this study.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I've observed in the U.S. claims data, which at least is what we're looking at for the open claims, there is the I don't want to call it miscoding, but I'll say like the ambiguity of diagnosis codes between the episodic nature of a depressive episode versus a manic episode versus simply the diagnosis of bipolar itself and its management. Those things can kind of fluctuate throughout. And so you can imagine that if somebody is in a depressive state, that would prompt the use of the antidepressant. And if somebody was in a manic state, that could prompt the use of the antipsychotic. And so given that 0 to 3 month period, there could be a little bit of protopathic bias associated with basically just mixture between the indication of the treatment as opposed to the outcome of the treatment. And if the timing of those things were like switched, that could induce such an effect that you're observing here.
So I have a suggestion. This is the first study that Professor Feng has done with Odyssey with Chinese data. So I was wondering, I know, Patrick, you mentioned Christopher from the US, but I also hear Chan and Nicole. You guys seem to be quite experts in this, helping to better understand like the design of this paper. Would you guys be interested if we set up some time with you guys on the side to actually help us better design this to make sure, right, we're doing everything properly?
Of course, I will. I am interested.
Awesome. Anyone else
delighted out.
interested? Anyone else who would be interested in even participating in this study? You can ping me on the side. How's that? Does anyone else have any other questions for Dr. Feng?
Only that it was a great study and a really important question. So I think the effort in trying to, work on the design of this study is a really, it's just an important piece of work. So yeah, happy to.
Awesome.
Totally
Great to hear. Great to hear. Thank you.
Yeah, and just to reinforce, I'm very excited to see this as well. I am not expert in this space, but when I was helping Christoph with our other bipolar thing, one of the things I found particularly notable in this space is there's very, very little international research in bipolar disease. So the idea that you are leading a study that is looking from a perspective that includes the United States and Europe and Asia, and specifically highlighting the data that you have in China, I think that is a tremendously significant accomplishment. So congratulate the team, and happy to support it any way I can.
Awesome. We would love to see other folks contribute as well. So that would be great. If other Asia folks wants to contribute, that would be awesome as well. So Asia Pacific, I should say. Any other questions for our presenter? Nope. All right. We will follow up with those who have an interest in helping to get this paper further along. The last thing I do want to talk about, and Patrick, I'm going to hand it over to you, is the Odyssey challenge that we have out there.
Yeah, thanks, Mui. So I know we only have 5 minutes left, but I would really like to encourage all of you to consider participating in the Odyssey challenge. For this month of March, we've been encouraging the community to think about identifying a data visualization that provides some insight about COVID-19 that you find to be useful and impactful. This can be anything that you've done over the last year. It could be a visualization that was in one of our Odyssey collaborative papers that you just thought was interesting. It could be something that is generated straight away from one of the open source Odyssey tools that you may be using, like Achilles or Atlas or anything else that you can do. Or you could take the data set from Charybdis and think about creating a novel visualization. Whatever you'd like. The point is just to get everybody sharing ideas of how to represent data in interesting and novel ways. To show an Asia Pacific motivated example, I thought I would just pull one up. Let's see here. Can you all see my screen? Let me know when you can.
Yeah, we can see.
Yep.
Yep.
We can see.
Okay. So I am just showing you Achilles. This is straight out of the box. If any of you have installed Achilles on your data, you could pull up a similar graph. And specifically here, I've selected the database JMDC, which is a Japanese claims data set. And I'm on the report that is called data density. And I'm scrolling down to this plot here, which is records per person. And so there is a line here that represents each of our data domains. So like this green one here, if I hover over, you can see this is the procedure domain. This blue one you can see is the drug domain. This orange one is conditions. The red one's drug eras, so on and so forth. And so you can see that in the JMDC data for the last 2 decades, there's been a fairly steady cadence of data. You can see in about 2013, there was an uptick in procedures that stayed remarkably stable. And then something in the world happened in February, March, April, May of 2020. That is our pandemic that we're looking at right there. But what's profound and interesting is this is having an impact not just on the patients who are being inflicted with this disease, but the entire health ecosystem. And that is manifest here by seeing that the average records per person in the procedure table in this data set was 5.6 back in, say, February of 2020. And only 3 months later, in May of 2020, that had dropped to 4 records per person. That is a so again, that was a 5.5 to 4. That means we are basically seeing a 33% reduction in overall healthcare utilization that took place over those course of the months. That is clearly anomalous relative to everything else. You see similar drops in the number of diagnoses, the number of drugs, the number of measurements. All health service utilization drops substantially. Now, the reason why I share this is because this is something that probably you all intuitively understand and know, that the impact of the pandemic as we shut down pieces of society. But what I think is fascinating and interesting is that taking one of our Odyssey tools directly off the shelf, looking at something as crude as a proxy as just amounts of data over time, can kind of reveal this startling pattern that that tells you that something weird was going on in 2020, and indeed it certainly felt that way for me. So as an example of an Odyssey challenge submission, something as simple as you pulling up your Achilles plot and taking a screenshot of the data density graph and explaining the insight that you might learn from your own data, that would be a really, really great submission for our Odyssey challenge. To show you where this can go if you're so interested, in the Odyssey Teams environment, we have under the Odyssey team, you will see that there's a channel that's called Odyssey Challenge March 2021. And you will see that there are some submissions that have been sent in from various collaborators of visualizations and ideas to take a look at. I would encourage anybody who's interested to consider making your own submission of something that you think is notable and interesting. And all you have to do is you can just go out to the Odyssey challenge here, type new conversation, and post your description of a visualization and why you think it's interesting. And at the Odyssey Community Call next week, well, we will be discussing the submissions that have been made and discussing what insights we can learn and what how we can use data visualization as an effective strategy to learn about the experience that everybody had last year.
So I'll comment on that as well, because just like you, I just went and looked at our Achilles for our Australian data asset, and I found the reverse almost of what you have. You know,
I'm just looking at my atlas here, Moe, as well, and we have the opposite.
Yeah,
I'm looking at mine.
Oh wow! Look, see, we had about a stable record here, but then look at the jump that it went in 2020. So we'll have our Australian colleagues post this, but yeah, you can see it went up instead of down.
Yeah, we had some stockpiling happening.
Yeah. Alrighty. Well, again, last day tomorrow. Please submit. Like Patrick says, as simple as going into your Achilles or Atlas into your data density report and just taking a picture of that graph and put it out there, and so that next week we can showcase all of this inside the community call and just the challenge of March. With that said, I want to say thank you, everybody, for joining us. Looking forward to the presentations in 2 weeks.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Okay. Bye.
再见。